Hello and welcome to Amer's podcast. My name is Amer, and today with me is Helena Holmström. Holmström
Yes,
Olsson.
yes,
I got it. I
you
got it.
got it.
Helena, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, you were proposed by a very nice guest of mine, previous guest, Jan Bos, of course. Uh, but and he talked a little bit about what you do, but it might be good to give you a bit of an introduction about yourself, your background, and what you do.
Yeah, yes. First of all, it's a privilege to be here. So
Thank you.
thank you and thank Jan for making this opportunity happen. So, about me, I actually started out in my background is in informatics.
Hmm.
So that's where I started. That's where I did my PhD. I did my thesis, graduated in Gothenburg, started working at what was then called the IT University, which was a place where we aimed at collecting everything around IT, IS, information systems, software engineering, a lot of those topics at that time that seemed like a good fit to be in one place. I left Sweden for a while doing a postdoc in something called Lero, which is a software research center in Ireland.
Hmm.
Still very strong and well established. I had the opportunity to be there in its very start. And that's where my software engineering interest started, you could say. Not that informatics is that far off, but they are different. So when I then returned back to Sweden, started again working in Gothenburg, and the software engineering unit department was created at the IT University. That's where I ended up in a position. And one thing leads to the next, and I became part of that department. I did research in what was finally the hosting department of the Research Collaboration Software Center, where Jan is the director. And that's where I am today in Software Center doing all my research within that collaboration. But I also took the chance to move from Gothenburg to Malmö.
Okay.
After, 8, 9, 10 years in the same place, I felt as if it would be good to see something new. So I'm now at Malmö University, professor of computer science. We're a young university, but I love the place, and it is an excellent place for the type of research that I love doing, and there are lots of opportunities also with companies in this region.
Mm.
So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, so I wanted to get into what you said about informatics and software engineering because I'm wondering what the difference is.
Yeah, me too. But
I
there
want to
is a
know.
difference, and I'm trying to figure out what this difference is actually all about. But I think for me, and maybe the informatics people will hate me for saying this, but for me, it was more about the understanding of challenges and the
Mm,
exploration, and maybe a little less on the solution development and the validation. So, what I really appreciate, I'm not saying it is not there,
mm,
but what I appreciated with the transition more towards software engineering and also computer science is the solution oriented focus. I mean, we
mm,
also explore the challenges. You need to identify the problem to even develop a solution. But the emphasis is typically a little bit stronger on the solution side and the validation
mm,
side. Especially, I mean, if I look at the PhD students we work with, it's much more of the tools development or the solutions development. It could be, of course, conceptual frameworks. That's also solutions, but it's really on that side where we tend to spend more focus than maybe my experience with where I come from.
yeah. So it was more on the situation itself, whatever
Yes.
the situation is, and not on how to solve this particular challenge or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference. And you mentioned some of your work. And I also saw that you, I think you wrote it together with Jan about product management. So,
Yes.
and like 9 approaches to product management. Could you tell a little bit more about that? Because I think product management is such an interesting kind of area. It's kind of in between. I sometimes feel it's like in between like the business side and the technology.
Yeah.
Like it tries to kind of make that kind of conversion or that kind of translation of, okay, this is what the business wants, and now this is how we can, or at least this is how we talk to the people in technology to make it work. So I want to know a little bit about that
Yeah.
paper.
It is a super interesting role. We have for a number of years had a separate product management community within the software center where we
Mm,
meet with the people in these roles and learn from them, get them to exchange knowledge and so on. So the interest has been there for a long time. And if the paper you mentioned, the digital product management, it was, so the background was a little bit, I mean, product management and what has been referred to for many years as software product management.
mm,
It's, these well established guidelines and ways of working and processes and everything, which are all good and all fine and working very often very well. But at the same time, we see very many new things. I mean, with the new technologies, with the increasing, if you just look at the systems we develop, they look different. They
mm,
have much more of the software, they have increasingly more data, they have AI components. So we have both in the systems those components, and we also get new tools. Because if we would make use of the data, if we would make use of the AI in our role as, in this case, product manager, we could really accelerate, we believe, the ways in which we develop systems. So
mm,
the background was a little bit on we see all these things happening, we see the emerging trend, and we see the increasing use of data and AI, which for us means that also this role needs to change and should change. We should
mm,
really try to rethink how we do product management to benefit and to maximize the benefits with the new technologies. So if you
mm,
then look at in our view, the role, and you mentioned it yourself, the product manager is very much on what to build and what to prioritize.
exactly.
There is this toolbox to use. So the approaches we present, they range from, the very traditional ones. There are situations with high certainty, fairly stable, you can do your requirements and you're pretty well off.
Mm,
But there are more and more situations where you're less certain. Things evolve and they change over time and all the time. And then we believe you need a different set of tools. So we have the data driven tools and mechanisms for product managers to use, as well as more of the AI side of things, where
mm,
you could even, one of the approaches is even, I mean, you can let the systems, you need to adopt more of the experimental approaches, we believe, to the extent that there might even be situations where you can have the system experiment with itself. So the reinforcement learning approaches. So basically, the approaches is a set of, like a toolbox that
mm.
we wish product managers could make use of to avoid the situation where you stay within the traditional just because you know it and it's comfortable, while you might actually know that you would benefit from making use of more of the data driven and AI driven.
Yeah, it's funny. So I before, well, it's a while ago, actually, 5 or 6 years ago. Uh, in my previous company, when I was working, we were also building products and stuff, and we were a small company, so you pick up roles. So for me, it was like, okay, you're in technology. Why don't you also be a product owner, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you just go into like a product role? And I'm like, well, I've never done that, but let's see where we get. And I think my experience with it is limited, but back then it really came down, as you said, to like priorities, creating the user stories, creating all the things that you need for a product to get built. Um, but that's, yeah, it's kind of the tip of the iceberg kind of thing, right? That's just one part of it. It's not. It's. I think there's a much deeper in the understanding that you need to have of the product and where you want to go than just the user stories that you create, right? It's the user stories is the what, basically. It's not why you do particular things. So I think that's interesting when you're saying that, like, we need more approaches. I guess that's kind of the traditional one, right? The traditional kind of approach. Um,
And
yeah.
also
How do you
to
think of that?
continuously. So that's one of the important aspects. It's
Mm-hmm.
one thing to build something,
Mm-hmm.
but there is something completely different involved when you look to continuously improve something. And we
Yeah,
had this
exactly.
beautiful quote from one of the key people in one of the companies we work with, where he said, so he used the metaphor of a child and a parent. So he
Mm.
said, we don't build systems anymore. We should grow them. We should
Mm.
view ourselves as the parents of the system. So it's born, it's created, and over time, it learns new things, it develops, it, improves, it matures. But then we also need mechanisms for helping out and making that happen. So continuous interaction with, for example, customers require a different approach. Not
Mm.
only the qualitative, the things we always did, asking people, visiting customers, but also more on the quantitative side, now when we have access to data, to just continuously learn and get insights on how the systems perform, are appreciated, are used or not used.
Mm.
So it is a bit of a different approach, I think, to to the system itself. It should
Yeah.
really last over a long time, but it should improve all the time.
Yeah.
And that mind shift, then you get only so far with the requirements. You need
Yeah,
something
that's true.
else.
Yeah, that's true. People have often used like the metaphor of like a car and stuff like that. I don't think that's a good metaphor because yeah, you're not bolting on things to a car, right? Keeping it growing. Like, I think I had that in like a previous podcast as well, where someone mentioned that as well, where it was like it's like a living organism in the sense where you keep expanding on it. It keeps learning. It keeps getting better at particular things and learning new skills. And I think when you look at product management, people, we think in versions, right? We think in, okay, this is version one, this is version two, and stuff like that. But it's still the same. It's kind of the same thing, right? It stays the same product, but it's just getting better and better. So yeah, it's fascinating to think about it that way. I don't think we do that too often. Usually we're like, yeah, let's get to the next release and that's it, and see what's after
Yes.
that.
And I think that is also, it comes with a long now tradition of, yeah, the agile ways of working, where you are
Mm.
typically asked to basically crank out features at fast pace. So you really focus on efficiency, and that comes with a certain mindset. If you
Yes.
deliver on efficiency, then that's it, and you do the best you can as fast as you can. But if you would make use of new technologies such as data and AI to figure out by
Mm.
experimenting what actually adds value, so rather the effectiveness of what you are doing, the effectiveness of a feature, the way in which customers actually use and appreciate, then you also realize that many of the things you focus on when you prioritize efficiency might in the end be waste because they are never used. And so
Yeah.
that kind of mind shift is also part of the work we do on product management, because in the end you spend R&D efforts you would wish for what you spend those efforts on to be used by customers. What you really should be looking for is to add value. And for adding value in today's context where things are quite rapidly changing and things are increasingly more difficult to predict, we think the only way is to actually experiment and try different things on a continuous basis. And that kind of approach is, I mean, we see it. It's not like it isn't there. But in the software intensive systems domain where we do most of our work, it is still, you try, they do experiment. There is A/B tests running and those things, but not to the extent that you would wish to see.
Yeah. It's there's well, as you said, it's a competitive landscape, right? In general, if you're in technology and you're doing something at kind of bleeding edge, you're also you want there's a balance of like pace and being secure in the sense that you're not going to break the system, right? That's not
Yes.
what you want. But you can imagine that so this is the thing with, for example, with A/B testing and experiments and stuff. What we do is, yeah, we put it live. We see what the kind of results are between the two kind of tests that we're doing, and then we make a decision.
Yeah.
And what what you're saying is, if I'm understanding it correctly, is wouldn't it be nice if you have that, do that A/B test, and the system itself will make that decision of thinking about it like, what's the right way to go? That's kind of the thing. Maybe changing itself and saying like, okay, this is the thing that we want to look at.
I think there are lots of opportunities for those kinds of approaches where very often we block ourselves or we get a little bit too, and maybe that's part of it. I'm involved in an interview study where we look at AI adoption and how to accelerate the use of AI. And one thing that keeps coming back is actually people know maybe that they would benefit, but they don't really find the time to learn something new, or because they are so busy with something else. So even if there is the capability and the opportunity, you tend to stay within where you already were because you know the ways of working. And I think the same thing is true for introducing experiments and an experiment mindset in an organization where the machinery is running and you have all the legacy to take care of and you don't want to break anything and there are processes and methods for everything and you coordinate cross team. And I get the feeling that sometimes it's just difficult to make that shift, to make it happen. You need some kind of space to introduce something new.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if you don't do it, you will be even more behind competition. So you just need to do it still. But I mean, we do see experimentation. We do see organizations making the mind shift. It's actually not so much about the technology, it's more the mindset and the ways of working that we believe that this is a good, you run an hypothesis, you test, you grow the system. You don't decide up front and you build, but rather something else. And again, if you are interested in the more data-driven ways of working, which everyone claimed to be, but then at some point you also need to actually start making use of the data. And the best way to make use of it, I think, is to, for example, run experiments, collect the data, and learn what would be the best solution.
Yeah. It's an interesting one from a perspective. So what I feel is, and that's a feeling. I don't know if that's correct, but we don't really trust the machine in terms of like trusting it to make the right decision and then also acting on it. And I mean, it's not too different from so in normal kind of software development, you have these things where you do like code reviews and those kind of things, and that's more like to get out errors and those kind of things. But you don't. it's not a trust issue per se, but you do that extra check to be sure, right? And we're trying to do that extra check on a machine that might be able to do it better than we can,
Yeah.
right? So it's a
Yeah.
little bit weird in that sense.
And maybe it's part of, I mean, the shifts that we are experiencing right now, also with the use of more AI technologies, where you would wish for a situation where people would adopt and make use of them to a much larger extent. It doesn't mean that you as a human don't have the opportunity to do a final check. I think there are many situations, and maybe most situations, where you should. But
Yes.
there is this. So, one thing that I find difficult is the discussion where I get the feeling that it is either or. Either it's AI or it's human. Either it's whatever technology or system or it's the human. I think of it, I would wish to see it much more of a interaction or collaboration. I mean, humans, we are good at many things. AI or technology are good at very many other things. And the combination of the two is actually, I think, really successful. So it shouldn't be AI just replacing tasks we feel are boring. There is this, you could really leverage the use of AI if you would let it complement, let it help you reinvent, and have this constant training of the models with our own knowledge, so the human AI collaboration rather than something else. And the same goes for, I think, the trust issue that you described, that we don't really dare, and who decides on the experiment, as if there is someone standing there shouting that I want to be the one deciding. There isn't. But if
No.
we just allow or let in the collaboration between the two, I think we would be much better off.
Yeah. No, I agree. What I would see is that, or at least what I can envision is that, for example, with an A/B test, let's take that as an example. I think that's a good example. Um, you run the A/B test. There's results out of that. You know what the results are. What it would be nice actually would be to have like an agent or an advisor or whatever you want to call it, that gives you like, okay, this is the results. This is what we've seen. These are the things that what was tested, and it's basically a decision then on the human to say like, hey, you want to go for this particular change, or do we keep this, or make that decision. What we're doing now is we're collecting the data, making the decision then based on the data, which can be wrong, by the way, when you
Yes.
collect it. So it's as you said, it's more of a augmentation
Mm.
than just replacing you
Yeah.
altogether. I think that's yeah.
And
I think
also
that's what I see.
from like a generating experiments point of view, I mean, we all
Yeah.
come with our assumptions. We
Yes.
will always do, and that's just how things are. So, and I remember visiting a company, this is many years ago, when they were like, oh, but we only experiment with the things we already know. How
Mm.
beautiful it could be if we would experiment with the things that are unknown, where we actually don't know. So we all build in our assumptions, and to sometimes, I mean, if we could have mechanisms that help us at least question those assumptions. But that's
Mm.
also the very sensitive hot button within data driven. I mean, you
Yes.
wouldn't, sometimes people don't appreciate being proven wrong of something. At least that's my experience. So even if there are all these benefits, to actually make it happen in practice turns out to be much more difficult. Because if you
Yeah.
would trust the result, sometimes you would put yourself in a bad situation. And unfortunately, organizations are not always the most rational of places.
Yeah, people want to protect themselves,
Yeah.
right? So they want to protect what they know and what they can influence. So I get that. It's yeah, it's an interesting thought though. I think we like to be in control as people, but sometimes uh, a little bit of extra help doesn't do any harm. I mean,
No. No, I don't think so.
Um,
And I mean, the good thing is that we do see many companies, even if hesitant, they
mhm,
try to, I mean, there are always a pocket, a smaller little part of something where you can
mm,
actually run experiments or try out new things. It can be new technologies or new ways of working, and it doesn't harm anything else. And
yeah.
those initiatives, I think, are super important when discussing not only this, but also other
Mm,
new things.
yeah.
And that we see happen, and that's, I think, critical for any change to happen.
Mm,
Then I think most people would wish for a situation where we could transform more quickly. But I mean, this is at least one of the evidences we have.
mm. And
Uh,
I wanted to switch to a different topic because we can go on and on about
yes.
this, but I know that it's just really fascinating to as a topic. But one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you've been in academia, you're a researcher, uh, so I think it sometimes feels like there's a gap between like the academia part and really the software engineering at companies.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that feels like that. Um, how do you see people like yourself, people that are researchers, kind of bridge that gap between the two?
Yeah. So, I mean, if I look at myself, the only way I know how to do research is to do industry academia collaboration. I'm
Mm,
industry funded. I work in close collaboration with these 14, 15 companies in Software Center.
mm,
That's the only approach that I know. But of course, I also know that there are other approaches. But
of course.
I really appreciate the opportunity of being able, having the privilege to meet with all of these on a continuous basis, to get a feel not only for what is now, but what is next. So
Mm,
because you get to know them a little bit, and then I think my job is to learn from all of them, to generalize, to help them understand the bigger trends or what others are doing, the best practices, help them sort and get an overview over things that they are super good at their things, but it's difficult
mm.
to also have the time and energy to look at everyone else, and you
Yeah,
don't
to
get to
really
know
go
any
deep.
everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, to really go deep on particular issues, right?
Yeah.
That I can imagine that's the tricky part. Usually, what you'll see is that you're when you're in a company or something like that, you you can do a lot of things, but you don't really go that deep, as deep as you go as a
Mm.
researcher, I think.
So I mean, giving examples, presenting best practices, enabling knowledge sharing among companies. Those are to me activities to bridge the gap. But also, of course, if I'm a researcher producing models, methods, processes,
Mm,
tools, whatever, to get them implemented, adopted, used by the companies, and to be part of that process,
mm,
to really, it's not just, I mean, it's always nice to publish a paper with something, but the key driver is to see something in practice, something being
mm.
used, a company making a tweak and twist on one of the models you developed, and just see it turn into something in practice. And that, I think, is important, to not just leave it as your own little conceptual contribution or whatever it is, but to be part of this thing being taken into use in
Mm.
practice. I
Yeah,
think that is maybe the best part, and
yeah,
that you would want to have an impact on the companies, a positive impact on the companies that are part of your research, to see
yeah.
them improve.
Yeah, what I see also is because you mentioned also like the being a professor and at the university and stuff like that. I think what's an added benefit for you to see these kind of things go, it's also in the what the students are going to be learning later, right? Because I mean that's the downstream kind of effect of it.
Yeah.
These students will most likely or could be working at these companies somewhere down the line, right? And them having the right skills then, or getting the right skills in university to be able to work at these companies is also, I think, a downstream effect of this, right?
Yes. And that is a true privilege of this work, to
Mm.
these young talented people, and to at least in some way be part of them finding a place, a career, and also for the companies to get access to a good pool of
Mm.
people. So that's of course also part of the equation. I do much less on the education side, but I mean,
Sure.
of course, I meet with students, and to connect the two, the students and the companies, is something that I really, really like.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, I don't know if you've had these conversations, but now that we were talking about it, I'm also sometimes wondering, like, how is it for people that are now students, right? They see all this AI talk and they see, like, they have a feeling that maybe the jobs that they wanted to do tomorrow are not going to be there, or they're going to be different than they are today, right? I'm wondering how they're looking at it. I haven't had the chance to talk to people that are doing these kind of things right now as students.
No.
But I can imagine that it can create some fear there as well.
Yeah, so, and this is me speculating, but I
Yeah.
mean, yes, there is certainly, or most probably, some fear, I think, in everyone. But if I look at the students, and maybe that's the strength of the young people, many
Mm.
of them, I mean, they are also super adaptive. They are flexible. They view the new things as opportunities.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if you didn't have something, you won't lose it either. So
Mm.
if they didn't, they just look for what is next, because they are not in the organization, they don't have the job yet, so they have nothing to lose, but rather they have something to gain. So if I
Mm.
look at the students, they are often very proactive in
Mm.
adopting new technologies, and thinking about what things could be. A little
Yes.
less afraid, maybe. But then, of course, the traditional roles that maybe were present when they started their studies, they might not be there.
Mm.
But then again, then it is our job as the professors or the whatever to make them ready and
Mm.
attractive for the new roles, titles, skills. That is the ideal world.
Yeah,
Also
it's
for
fascinating.
universities to adjust to the needs of industry.
Yeah, it's I think the trickiest part there is just the pace, right? It's just
Yes.
the how fast things are going. It's hard
Yes.
to adjust to, like, every few months there's something new coming out, right? And you're like, yeah, okay, how do we manage this now? Because
Yeah.
it's like it
Yes.
changes stuff. It's fascinating, and I think you're right in the sense that um, um, if I think back, a lot of things that are around now were not around when I was
No.
in school or something like that, right? Because it's a lot has changed since then, and we're not even talking about that long ago. We're talking about maybe 10, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Where you were still learning about all kinds of different things that are just irrelevant right now.
Yes.
And yeah, I think it's fascinating in the sense that uh, when you maybe grow up with these things, because now there's going to be a generation that grows up with these tools and these things that they can do, um, you don't see it as weird, right? It's a part of life. You already know
Yeah.
that this
It's
this
a
is there.
default state, which
Yes.
is very different.
Yeah, it's like with people that grew up without the internet and people that grew up with the internet and those kind of things. Like, it's, if you know it's there, if you've grown up with it, then yeah, it's a different story. Or
Mm.
in my particular case, mobile phones, for example. You didn't have smartphones back then. Everybody was playing outside. Like, was a default state. Now it's a different one, and I think that's fascinating to think about because it creates opportunities and also um, maybe ways that we didn't think about before. I think that's the main thing.
I think so too. I mean, if I look at just the recent years and how
Mm,
the companies have changed, and I mean, not the least, if we go back to where we started, the product management role, things happen. It will be
mm,
different. And when today's batch of students graduate, it will look again different.
mm,
And maybe what I find in the students is that they are actually much more used to things continuously changing.
mm,
They are born in a time when what we refer to things go faster. But that's, if you are born then, it's the
it's
normal
default.
pace. So in
Yeah.
some way, maybe we feel it's faster compared to what they feel. But I do think that it's a critical skill of anyone, and especially young people, to have this mindset of you need to also continuously learn, just
Mm,
like the systems, because there will always be something new. And that's a
yeah.
skill that is, in one way, very difficult to teach, but it just has to be part of the equation in
Yeah.
one shape or form.
When you grow up with it, it's easier, right? That's just the way it is. I know. I mean, if I look at my parents or things like that, for them a lot harder to learn all these kind of new things, right? They didn't grow up with it, so they're like, yeah, this is all new skills. But if you already had them, yeah, it's not new anymore.
No.
It's just a part of life.
You know, when I
That's
teach
the
students, I feel old.
How you not?
Well,
No, no, but I get what you mean. It's like they have a different mindset. I think mindset is kind of the word of the podcast now, but they have a different way of maybe taking in stuff or
mm,
learning about new things.
mm,
It's different than what we're used to. Um, so, Helena, I wanted to ask you one more question before
mm.
we wrap up. It's the question I always ask at the end. So, who would you like to see as a next podcast guest?
Yes, so I have a name for you. Her
Hmm.
name is Rimma Dusupova.
Okay.
She is in industry. She recently actually did an industrial PhD with us
Okay.
and has lots of experience in all the topics we discussed, especially within AI. And I think that she would bring a really nice industry and academia perspective with a background also in a very large um, organization where they
Hmm.
do very large projects.
Okay.
So Rimma Dusupova is my suggestion. I think you would
All
have an
right.
interesting chat, and I would be happy to connect you.
We'll get that going. It sounds very interesting, to say the least. So I'm happy to connect with her. Then there's nothing else for me to do than to thank you for your time, Helena.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
See you later.
Thank you.